A bitter millionaire escapes the world and only wants one night without consequences. But at his door appears a young woman with an unusual proposal. Make me a woman. What begins with a touch ends with a shattered soul. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Let's continue. The snow fell heavily on the Colorado mountains, forming a white blanket that hid the secrets buried in the valley. Nathan Reed observed through the panoramic window of his isolated house, a glass of Scotch whiskey in his right hand, the ice melting slowly, while his thoughts wandered through territories he preferred to keep locked away. At 42, he had built a financial empire that made kings and presidents bow their heads in reverence. But on that freezing December night, all he felt was the suffocating weight of emptiness. His family had always been a dynasty of predators. From an early age, Nathan learned that feelings were weapons in the hands of enemies, that compassion was synonymous with weakness, that to survive in the world of the Reeds was to devour before being devoured. The patriarch of the family, his grandfather, had built the first empire through blackmail and murders disguised as accidents. His father had continued the tradition, expanding the business into money laundering and political corruption. Nathan, in turn, had refined the methods, transforming brutality into strategy, violence into psychological control. But there was a name that still haunted him during sleepless nights: Victor Marshall, a journalist too brave for his own good, who had sniffed out the darkest secrets of the Reed family. Nathan still remembered the thin man with glasses who smoked cheap cigarettes and had fingernails stained with printing ink. Victor had discovered something that could destroy not only the business, but expose decades of crimes that kept the family at the top of the power food chain. The decision Nathan had made years ago still burned in his conscience like a hot iron. He had tried to buy Victor off, offering enough money for the man to disappear with his family and never return. But Victor Marshall was one of those old-school journalists who believed that truth was worth more than gold. He refused every proposal, every veiled threat, every attempt at negotiation, until Nathan was forced to make the choice that would turn his soul to stone forever. It wasn't he who pulled the trigger. It wasn't he who pushed Victor off the building. It wasn't he who forged the suicide. But it was he who gave the order, whispered like an inverted prayer on an encrypted phone, in the early hours of a morning when rain washed the streets of Manhattan. 2 weeks later, Victor Marshall was found dead in a cheap motel room, with a suicide note that Nathan knew had been written by one of his men. The price of survival had always been high in the Reed family, but that specific death had left a different mark. Perhaps because Victor had a young daughter, perhaps because the man reminded Nathan of himself in a purer version, in an alternative life where he had chosen truth instead of power. Since then, Nathan had carried the weight of that decision like a second skin, an invisible layer of guilt that accompanied him in every business deal closed, every victory achieved, every night he slept alone in silk sheets that cost more than the annual salary of an ordinary worker. Now isolated in that house lost among the snowy peaks, Nathan was trying to escape the ghosts his own hand had created. There were no employees, no security guards, no lovers trained to moan soullessly while he lost himself in bodies that offered nothing more than temporary relief. Just him, the silence of the mountain, and the growing feeling that he had traded his humanity for a throne made of bones. The doorbell rang at exactly 11 o'clock, cutting through the silence like a blade. Nathan frowned, placing the glass on the mahogany table. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody should be able to get there without being detected by the security systems. But the metallic sound echoed again, insistent, almost urgent. Nathan walked to the door, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun he always carried, even in moments of supposed peace. When he opened the door, the mountain cold invaded the hall like a hungry ghost. And there, on the threshold, was a young woman who seemed to have stepped out of a disturbing dream. She wore a simple dark coat that didn't offer enough protection against the harsh winter. Her brown hair was damp from melted snow, stuck to her pale face in a way that suggested hours of walking. Her hands trembled, but not just from cold. It was her gaze that completely disarmed him. Nathan had faced killers, corrupt politicians, mafia bosses, men who could take life with the same ease as signing a check. But this young woman's eyes carried something he immediately recognized, the weight of someone who had seen the world crumble too early, who intimately knew the taste of betrayal and loss. "Make me a woman," she said, her voice firm despite the trembling of her body. Nathan blinked, certain he had heard wrong. But she didn't look away, showed no embarrassment or hesitation. There was something about her presence that disturbed more than excited, something ancient that bled without showing the wound. He should have closed the door, he should have activated security. He should have done anything except stand there, paralyzed, looking at a stranger who had appeared in the middle of the storm with a request that sounded like both condemnation and redemption. "Who are you?" Nathan asked, his voice hoarser than intended. "Eve," she replied simply, "and you know exactly why I'm here." The storm outside was less dangerous than the silence that formed between them. Nathan knew he should close the door, that he should send her away, that he should protect what little remained of his sanity. But there was something about her, or perhaps something about him, that prevented him from making the sensible decision. Instead, he took a step back, making way for her to enter his house, his life, his personal hell. Eve crossed the threshold as if crossing an invisible border between worlds, and Nathan knew, with the terrible certainty of someone who had already condemned men to death, that nothing would ever be the same again. Eve entered the house as if she knew every corner, every shadow cast by the amber lights. She didn't look around with curiosity or admiration, showed no surprise at the discreet luxury that decorated the environment. She simply walked to the center of the living room, removed her soaked coat and hung it on the back of a leather armchair, revealing a simple black dress that embraced her slender body without provocation, but with a natural elegance that Nathan rarely saw in women of his social circle. "I shouldn't be here," Nathan said, closing the door but keeping his hand close to the lock, as if he could still reverse that senseless decision. "No," Eve agreed, drying her face with the back of her hand. "But I am." Nathan studied her with the trained eye of someone who had learned to read people like open books. She was no more than 25, but carried a maturity that only came with suffering. There was something familiar about her features, a distant echo that stirred memories he preferred to keep buried. Her brown hair framed a face of delicate lines, but her eyes were what disturbed him most. Dark, deep, with that quality of someone who had seen too much and lost even more. "How did you get here?" he asked, keeping his distance. "This property isn't on any map. There are no marked roads." Eve smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the expression of someone who knew secrets they'd rather not know. "I know many things about you, Nathan Reed. More than you imagine." The name sounded different in her mouth, not with the fearful reverence Nathan was used to hearing, nor with the barely disguised hatred of enemies. There was a dangerous intimacy in the way she pronounced it, as if it were a shared secret between old acquaintances. "You're a journalist," Nathan said, and it wasn't a question. "Or you work for someone who wants to harm me." "No," Eve answered, walking to the fireplace that crackled softly. She extended her hands toward the fire, and Nathan noticed that she was trembling not just from cold. "I'm not a journalist. I don't work for anyone. I'm here by my own choice." "Nobody chooses to approach me without a reason," Nathan said, his voice laden with years of justified paranoia, "especially not a young woman, alone, in the middle of a storm." Eve turned to face him, and Nathan saw something in her eyes that made him take an involuntary step back. It wasn't hatred, although it could have been. It wasn't fear, although it should have been. It was something more complex, more dangerous. It was recognition, as if she knew him in a way that went beyond newspaper headlines or intelligence dossiers. "You're right," she said. "I have a reason, but it's not what you imagine." Nathan poured himself more whiskey, offering a glass to Eve, who declined with a delicate gesture of her hand. He needed alcohol to process the strangeness of that situation, the disturbing sensation that he was being manipulated by someone who appeared to be more vulnerable than him. "Then explain," he said, settling into the armchair across from her. "Why would a woman who doesn't know me appear at my door in the middle of the night and ask me to do what you asked?" Eve moved away from the fireplace and walked to the window, watching the snow that continued to fall. "I've never been touched by a man," she said, her voice low but clear. "Never been kissed, never anything. And I decided that if it were to happen, it would be with you." Nathan almost laughed. The idea was absurd, impossible. Women didn't appear out of nowhere to give themselves to him. His sexual experiences were carefully calculated transactions, encounters with luxury prostitutes, or brief relationships with women who knew exactly what to expect from him. Nobody came to his door offering virginity as if it were a gift. "You're lying," he said. "Or you're crazy. Or both." "Maybe," Eve agreed, without taking offense. "But not about this. About being a virgin, I mean, about being here by my own choice." Nathan studied her more carefully. There was something in her posture, in the way she kept her arms close to her body, in the way she avoided direct eye contact, that suggested a disturbing truth. Some women he had known had this same manner, this same fragility masked by determination. "Why me?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Why would you choose the most dangerous man you know for an experience that should be special?" Eve turned to him, and Nathan saw tears in the corners of her eyes. "Because," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "I need it to be with someone who understands me, someone who knows what it's like to carry the weight of destruction, someone who won't try to save me." The answer hit Nathan like a punch to the stomach. There was something in the way she talked about destruction, about weight, about not being saved, that echoed his own deepest feelings. It was as if she had looked inside his soul and found the same demons he carried. "You don't know me," he said, but his voice sounded less convincing than he intended. "I do," Eve answered, wiping the tears with the back of her hand. "I know that you kill without blinking. I know that you destroy lives as easily as signing contracts. I know that you carry enough guilt to sink ships. And I know that you haven't slept a full night since you killed my father." The whiskey glass slipped from Nathan's hand, shattering on the wooden floor. The amber liquid spread among the glass shards like golden blood, and the sound of the impact echoed through the silent house like a gunshot. "My real name is Eve Marshall," she continued, her voice now firm without trembling. "I'm the daughter of Victor Marshall, the journalist you had killed 6 years ago. I grew up hearing that Nathan Reed was the demon who destroyed my family, who pushed my father to suicide, who left my mother to go crazy with grief." Nathan felt the world spinning around him. Victor Marshall, the name that haunted him, the ghost that visited him during sleepless nights. He vaguely remembered that the man had a daughter, a girl who had appeared in newspaper photos after her father's death, but who had quickly disappeared from the media. A child with sad eyes, who hid behind her grieving mother. "You grew up," he said, his voice hoarse. "You grew up and came to me for what?" "Revenge," Eve smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile, sad and beautiful at the same time. "No," she said. "I came so that you could show me what it's like to be touched by someone who knows darkness. I came so that you could make me a woman, Nathan Reed. Because I believe I can only free myself from the past by giving myself to the man who created it." Nathan remained silent, processing the revelation. Eve Marshall, the daughter of the man he had ordered killed. She was there, in his house, asking him to touch her, to transform her into a woman. It was madness. It was dangerous. It was impossible. It was also the most honest thing anyone had ever said to him. The revelation hung in the air like toxic smoke, poisoning the environment with its brutal truth. Nathan remained motionless, observing Eve Marshall as if she were an apparition, a ghost materialized from his deepest nightmares. Victor Marshall's daughter, the sad-eyed girl he had seen in newspaper photographs, now a woman who had crossed half the country to stand before him. "You want to kill me," Nathan said, not as a question, but as a statement. "You came here to make me pay for what I did to your father." Eve slowly shook her head, walking carefully around the glass shards scattered on the floor. "If I wanted to kill you, you'd already be dead. I've had 6 years to plan. 6 years to study your every move, every security measure, every weakness. It's not revenge I'm looking for." "Then what is it?" Nathan asked, his voice heavy with distrust. "Because a woman doesn't cross the country to give herself to the man who destroyed her family without a very specific reason." Eve stopped in front of the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines as if looking for something familiar. "My mother went insane after my father's death, literally. Spent years talking to herself, conversing with him as if he was still alive. I took care of her until I was 16, when she died in a fire she herself caused. She lit cigarettes all over the house on a December night, exactly like this one." Nathan felt a tightness in his chest. He knew the details of the Marshall family's life after Victor's death, knew because he made a point of monitoring the consequences of his actions. But hearing it from the daughter's own mouth, seeing the raw pain in her eyes, was different from reading cold reports. I survived, Eve continued, taking a book from the shelf. Burns on my left arm and back. I was in the hospital for months, then went to an orphanage. I never let anyone touch me again. I couldn't. Every time someone tried, I relived the fire, smelled the smoke, heard my mother's screams. Nathan watched as she leafed through the book, noticing the discreet scars that climbed up her left arm, marks that the simple dress couldn't completely hide. He began to understand why she had chosen that dress, why she maintained a certain distance, why there was something broken in her posture. At 18, Eve continued, I began investigating you. Not for revenge, but to understand. I wanted to know who the man was who had destroyed my life, what kind of person could sleep knowing he had caused orphans in the world. And what did you discover? Nathan asked, genuinely curious. Eve smiled, but it was a smile without joy. I discovered that you're broken too. I discovered that you carry enough guilt to sink ships. I discovered that you've never had a full night's sleep since you killed my father. I discovered that, in a way, you've become a prisoner of the same hell you created for me. Nathan got up, walking to the window. The snow continued to fall, covering the world with its deceptive purity. You studied psychology, he said. You're trying to analyze me. I did study, yes, but this isn't analysis, it's recognition. Two broken people recognize each other, Nathan. It's as if we speak the same language of pain. Nathan turned to face her. So you came here for what? For us to console each other? To share our misery? Eve closed the book and put it back on the shelf. I came here because I believe I can only free myself from the past by facing it completely. My father died because of you. My mother went insane because of you. I've never been able to be touched by anyone because of you. You are the center of all my destruction. And for that reason you want to give yourself to me? Nathan asked, incredulous. For that reason, I need to give myself to you, Eve corrected, because as long as you are the demon of my nightmares, I will never be able to be a complete woman. I need to discover if you're really the monster I built in my imagination, or if you're just a man who made terrible choices. Nathan felt something move inside him, an emotion he couldn't identify. It was fear, but also something more. It was as if Eve were offering not just her body, but a form of expiation he had never imagined possible. You don't know what you're asking, he said, his voice lower. I'm not a gentleman. I'm not capable of tenderness. I can't give you what a first time should be. I don't want gentleness, Eve answered, walking until she stood before him. I don't want tenderness. I want truth. I want you to touch me without lies, without pretense, without trying to protect me from who you really are. Nathan looked at her, so close now that he could smell the soft perfume of her skin, mixed with the scent of melted snow. There was something hypnotic about her presence, something that attracted and terrified him at the same time. And if I say no, he asked. Then I'll leave, Eve answered simply. And you'll continue carrying the weight of my destruction forever, and I'll continue being a prisoner of the fear you created in me. Nathan extended his hand, stopping a few inches from her face. Eve didn't back away, but he could see the tension in her muscles, the effort she was making not to retreat. You're afraid, he observed. Very much, Eve admitted, but not of you. I'm afraid of continuing to be the broken girl you created. I'm afraid of never being able to be whole. Nathan let his hand fall, taking a step back. Stay, he said finally, but I won't touch you today. I won't touch you until I'm sure that's what you really want. Eve nodded, as if she expected exactly that response. All right, I can wait. I've waited 6 years, I can wait a few more days. There's a guest room on the second floor, Nathan said, returning to his armchair. You can use any clothes you want from the closet. There's food in the fridge. Make yourself at home. Eve headed for the stairs, stopping on the first step. Nathan, she called. Yes? Thank you for not sending me away. Nathan watched as she climbed the stairs, each step echoing through the silent house. When she disappeared from view, he poured himself more whiskey, avoiding looking at the glass shards on the floor. Eve Marshall, the daughter of the man he had ordered killed. She was in his house, sleeping in his guest bed, asking him to make her a woman. It was madness. It was dangerous. It was impossible. And he already knew he wouldn't be able to refuse. The next 3 days passed like a strange and silent dance. Eve moved around the house as if she had always lived there, but maintained a respectful, almost reverent distance. Nathan observed her from afar, studying each gesture, each expression, looking for signs of lies or manipulation. But she seemed genuinely at ease, as if being in the house of the man who killed her father was the most natural thing in the world. The mornings followed an unspoken ritual. Nathan woke up early, as he always had, and found Eve already in the kitchen, preparing coffee with a precision that suggested years of practice. She wore simple clothes she had found in the guest room closet, pieces that probably belonged to some of the women who had passed through there, but which on her seemed to have found their true owner. "Did you sleep well?" she always asked, serving him a cup of black coffee exactly as he liked it. "No," Nathan answered honestly. "I never sleep well." It was true. Since Victor Marshall's death, Nathan had suffered from chronic insomnia. He spent nights awake, wandering through the house like a ghost of himself, or sitting in his armchair reading books he couldn't absorb. But now, with Eve in the house, the problem had intensified. He heard her move in the room above, heard her footsteps in the hallway, heard the muffled sounds she made when she dreamed. On the second night he heard her scream, a sharp, desperate scream that cut through the silence of the house like a razor. Nathan ran up the stairs 3 steps at a time, finding her sitting in bed, sweaty and trembling, her eyes fixed in terror. "Fire," she murmured when she saw him. There was fire everywhere. And my mother wouldn't stop screaming. Nathan stood in the doorway, divided between the impulse to console her and the fear that his touch might make it worse. Eve noticed his hesitation and offered a sad smile. "You don't need to touch me," she said. "Just stay there until I fall back asleep, please." Nathan sat in the chair in the corner of the room, watching as she lay down again. He stayed there for hours, listening to her breathing calm down, seeing her body gradually relax. Only when he was sure she was sleeping deeply did he return to his room. During the day, they maintained careful conversations, circling around the most dangerous subjects, like 2 experienced dancers. Eve talked about her years in the orphanage, about her psychology studies, about the temporary jobs she had done to survive. Nathan, in turn, found himself sharing details about his life that he had never told anyone. "You have a sister," Eve said on the 3rd day as they ate lunch in silence. It wasn't a question. Nathan stopped eating, looking at her with surprise. "How do you know that?" "There are photos of her around the house, always the same woman at different ages. She has your eyes, but there's something different in them. Something absent." Nathan sighed, pushing his plate away. "Sophia. She's 2 years younger than me. She has schizophrenia." "Where is she now?" "In a private psychiatric hospital. The best money can buy." Eve studied his face with that penetrating look he had already learned to recognize. "But you don't visit her." "I can't," Nathan admitted. "She recognizes me when she's lucid. And when she recognizes me, she screams as if I were a demon." "And do you think you are?" Nathan met her eyes. "Don't you think so?" Eve rose from the table, walking to the window. "I think you're a man who made impossible choices. I think each person you hurt left a mark on you. I think you carry the weight of each life you destroyed. That doesn't make me less of a monster." "No," Eve agreed, "but it makes you human. Monsters don't feel guilt, Nathan. Monsters sleep well at night." That afternoon, Eve found the diary. Nathan had gone for a walk around the property, trying to process the strange intimacy that was developing between them. When he returned and found her sitting on his bed, reading a leather notebook he kept locked in the bedside table drawer. "You shouldn't have that," he said, but his voice carried no anger. "It's Sophia's," Eve said, without raising her eyes from the pages. "She writes about you, about how you used to protect her when you were children, about how you were the only one who understood her voices, who didn't try to medicate her to make her be quiet." Nathan sat on the edge of the bed, keeping his distance. "My father wanted to commit her when she was 15, said she was an embarrassment to the family. I prevented it. But you ended up committing her anyway." "Because she tried to kill herself," Nathan said, his voice breaking slightly. "Because the voices told her to throw herself out of the bedroom window. Because I came home and found her hanging from the windowsill, laughing and talking to people who didn't exist." Eve closed the diary, finally looking at him. "And that's why you killed my father. For Sophia." Nathan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the truth he had never told anyone. "Your father discovered that our family was financing illegal experiments at the hospital where Sophia was committed. Experimental drugs, unapproved therapies, procedures that violated all ethical protocols. He was going to expose everything, and you couldn't let him. Not because I cared about the family's reputation, Nathan said, opening his eyes, but because if he exposed the experiments, Sophia would be transferred to a public hospital, and I knew she wouldn't survive there. Eve was silent for a long moment, absorbing the revelation. So you chose between my father and your sister. I chose my sister, Nathan admitted, and to this day I don't know if it was the right choice. Sophia is still committed. She still screams when she sees me. And your father is still dead. Eve extended her hand, lightly touching the back of his hand. It was the first physical contact between them, and Nathan felt an electric current run up his arm. She didn't pull away when he didn't withdraw his hand, but she also didn't intensify the touch. You saved your sister, she said softly, at the cost of destroying my family. Both things can be true at the same time. Nathan looked at her hand on his, so small and pale against his skin. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I don't deserve forgiveness. I didn't come here to forgive you, Eve answered. I came here to understand you, and to understand myself through you. Nathan turned his hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. Eve tensed for a moment but didn't pull away. You still want me to touch you? Even knowing why I did what I did? Especially knowing, Eve answered, because now I know you're not a monster. You're just a man who carries too many demons. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, thinking about Eve's hand on his, about the way she had read Sophia's diary without judgment, about the way she had accepted his confession without trying to minimize or justify his actions. She had seen him in his most raw, most broken form, and hadn't run away. At 3 a.m, he heard footsteps in the hallway. Eve appeared at his bedroom door, wearing only a simple nightgown she had found in the closet. She didn't say anything, just walked to the bed and lay down beside him, on top of the covers. You don't have to be alone tonight, she whispered. Nathan remained motionless, feeling the warmth of her body beside his. Eve, just sleep, she said. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time in 6 years, Nathan slept deeply, and when he woke up, Eve was still there, watching him with those dark eyes that seemed to see through his soul. Good morning, she said, smiling softly. Good morning, Nathan responded, realizing that something had irreversibly changed between them during the night. The proximity of the previous night had broken something between them, an invisible barrier that now lay in ruins. Nathan woke up with Eve's body curved against his, her head resting on his chest, her brown hair spread across his shirt. She slept deeply, her face relaxed and young, without the shadows she usually carried in her eyes when awake. Nathan remained motionless, absorbing the strangeness of the situation. It had been years since he had shared a bed with anyone beyond casual encounters that ended before dawn. The simple intimacy of having someone sleeping beside him was something he had forgotten existed. But with Eve it was different. There were no sexual expectations, no romantic pretensions. It was just two broken people finding comfort in each other's presence. When Eve awoke, she showed no surprise or embarrassment at being in his arms. She just opened her eyes, met his gaze, and smiled with a naturalness that completely disarmed him. You slept, she observed, running her fingers lightly over the dark circles that always marked his face. I slept, Nathan confirmed, his voice hoarse with sleep. I don't know how. Maybe because you weren't alone, Eve suggested, moving away slightly, but not leaving the bed. Sometimes loneliness is what keeps us awake. Nathan studied her face in the soft morning light. There was something different about her, too, a softness that wasn't present in the previous days, as if sleeping beside him had relieved some weight she carried. Eve, he began, but she placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. Not yet, she whispered. I'm not ready yet, but I'm getting there. The following days acquired their own rhythm, a dance of gradual approach that surprised them with its naturalness. Eve cooked for him, simple dishes but made with care. Nathan, in turn, shared stories of his childhood, rare moments of humanity amid the brutality that defined his family. Sophia used to draw, he told her one afternoon as they walked through the snow-covered property. Strange, abstract drawings, but there was something beautiful in them. My mother would throw them away, said they were evidence of her illness. Did you keep any? Eve asked, stepping carefully on the soft snow. I keep them to this day. There's a whole folder in my office in Manhattan. Sometimes I look at them and can see the world as she saw it, chaotic but full of colors no one else sees. Eve stopped, turning to face him. You love her very much. She's the only person I've ever loved, Nathan admitted. The only person who knows me completely and yet loved me too. Before the disease got worse. What happened to make it worse? Nathan hesitated, looking at the distant mountains. Our father died when she was 18, murdered by a business rival. Sophia was present when it happened. She saw everything. The voices she sometimes heard became constant after that. And you took over the family business. Someone had to take over. My mother was too busy planning how to use her husband's death to gain sympathy in high society. Sophia was lost in her own world. I was the only one left. Eve resumed walking, reflecting on his words. You never had a choice, did you? We all have choices, Nathan answered. I chose to become worse than my father. I chose to be more efficient, more cruel, more calculating. Nobody forced me into that. You were 20, Eve observed. How you were just a boy trying to protect what was left of your family. Age is no excuse for the things I did. Eve stopped again, this time extending her hand to touch his face. Nathan allowed the touch, closing his eyes and leaning the weight of his head into her delicate palm. I'm not trying to excuse your actions, she said softly. I'm trying to understand the man who committed them. There's a difference. That night Eve appeared in his room again, but this time she didn't just lie down beside him. She sat on the edge of the bed, watching him with an intensity that made him feel naked, despite being fully clothed. Tell me about the night you ordered my father's death, she said, her voice calm but determined. Nathan sat up in bed, leaning against the headboard. Eve, I need to know, I need to understand how it was for you, what you felt, what you thought. Nathan closed his eyes, returning to that night that had haunted him for years. I tried all the alternatives. I offered money, offered protection, offered a new identity. Your father refused everything. Because he believed that truth was more important. Because he believed that truth was more important, Nathan agreed. And I admire that about him. I admired it even then. But I couldn't let him expose the experiments. So you called someone. I called a man I had used before. I just said that the problem needed to be solved. He understood what that meant. Eve remained silent for a moment, absorbing the confession. Did you regret it immediately? No, Nathan admitted, opening his eyes. I felt relieved, because it meant Sophia would be safe. The regret came later, when I read about the impact on your family. When I saw the photos of you and your mother at the funeral. You went to the funeral? I stayed in the car across the street. I saw you throwing dirt on the coffin. You were 19, but you looked like a lost child. Eve stood up, walking to the window. I remember that day. I remember feeling watched. I remember looking around and seeing strange cars, people I didn't know. You looked directly at me, Nathan said. For a moment our eyes met through the car window. I remember, Eve whispered. There was a man in a black car. He looked devastated. More devastated than some of the people at the funeral. Nathan rose, walking until he stood behind her. That man was me, and I was devastated. Because even while making the choice I thought necessary, I knew I had just destroyed an innocent family. Eve turned, coming face to face with him. They were so close that Nathan could feel her breath, see the small scars the fire had left on her neck. Did you cry? She asked. No, Nathan answered. I had forgotten how to cry, but something died in me that day. Something that never came back. Eve raised her hand, touching his chest over his heart. It didn't die. It just hid. Because if it had died, you wouldn't feel guilt. You wouldn't lose sleep. You wouldn't let me stay in your house. Nathan covered her hand with his. Eve, I don't know if I can be the man you need me to be. I don't need you to be another man, Eve answered. I need you to be yourself completely, without masks, without protections, without lies. I don't know if I know how to be myself. Eve smiled, and for the first time since she arrived, it was a genuinely happy smile. Then we'll learn together. You teach me to be touched, and I'll teach you to be human again. Nathan felt something break inside him, a wall he had built around his heart years ago. Are you sure? Absolutely sure that's what you want. Absolute, Eve answered, but not today. Today, I just want you to hold me. To show me it's possible for two broken hearts to beat in the same rhythm. Nathan pulled her into his arms, feeling her fit perfectly against his body. She trembled slightly but didn't pull away. He carried her to the bed, laying her down carefully before lying down beside her. "Just hold me," Eve whispered, nestling against him. Nathan embraced her, feeling for the first time in years that perhaps there was hope for his condemned soul. Perhaps love wasn't just a word that other people used. Perhaps two broken people could become whole together. For the second time in 6 years, Nathan slept deeply. And this time he wasn't tormented by nightmares. The transformation happened gradually, like ice melting in the sun. Nathan woke the next morning with Eve still in his arms, but now there was something different in the way she fit against him. Less tension, more confidence. She didn't wake with a start as on other mornings, but slowly, like someone who had finally found peace. "Good morning," she murmured against his chest, her voice heavy with sleep. "Good morning," Nathan answered, allowing himself to tighten the embrace for a moment before pulling away. But Eve didn't pull away. Instead, she raised her head and looked at him with an intensity that made him stop breathing for an instant. There was something new in her eyes, a decision that wasn't there before. "Today," she said simply. Nathan felt his heart accelerate. "Are you sure?" "I've been sure for days," Eve answered. "I was just waiting to have enough courage to say it." Nathan sat up in bed, pulling her with him. "Eve, I need you to understand something. I don't know how to be gentle. I don't know how to do this in a romantic way." Eve smiled, touching his face. "I don't want romance. I want truth. I want you to touch me as the man you are, not as the man you think you should be." "I might hurt you." "You already hurt me," Eve answered without bitterness. 6 years ago. Now I want to see if you can heal me too." Nathan studied her face, looking for signs of doubt or fear. But he found only determination and something that dangerously resembled trust. She trusted him. Despite everything, despite knowing exactly who he was and what he had done, Eve trusted him. "Then let me prepare you," he said, getting up from the bed. "It won't be how you might have imagined." Nathan spent the entire day preparing the house for that night. He lit the main fireplace, filled the bathtub with hot water and aromatic oils, prepared a simple but careful meal. Eve watched him work, a small smile on her lips, as if she were seeing a side of him that had never existed before. "Have you done this before?" she asked, watching him arrange flowers he had cut from the winter garden. "No," Nathan admitted. "I never had reasons to do this before." "Then why now?" Nathan stopped, looking at her. "Because you deserve it. Because even if I don't know how to be romantic, I can at least try to show that you means something." Eve approached, touching his arm. "Means what, Nathan?" Nathan hesitated, the words stuck in his throat. "It means that maybe I've spent the last 6 years not just carrying guilt, but also waiting for you. Without knowing." The confession hung in the air between them like a fragile bridge. Eve rose on tiptoe, kissing him softly on the face, near the mouth but not on the mouth. "Then let's stop waiting," she whispered. Night came with a gentle storm, snow falling in large, slow flakes that covered the world with silence. Nathan had prepared everything carefully, but when Eve came down the stairs wearing only a silk robe she had found in the closet, he forgot all plans. She was beautiful in a way that went beyond physical beauty. There was something luminous about her skin, something decided in her movements. She didn't seem like a frightened virgin about to give herself. She seemed like a woman who had finally decided to reclaim her own body. "Are you afraid?" Nathan asked, serving her a glass of wine. "No," Eve answered, taking a sip. "I'm nervous, but I'm not afraid. Not of you." Nathan approached, taking the glass from her hand and placing it on the table. "We can stop at any moment. Any moment, you say." "I know," Eve said, undoing the knot of the robe. "But I won't stop." The silk slid off her shoulders, revealing a body that was both fragile and strong. The scars from the fire marked her left arm and part of her back, pale lines that told the story of her survival. Nathan felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of guilt and protection that surprised him with its intensity. "You're beautiful," he said, and they weren't just words. It was a realization, a truth that hit him like a revelation. Eve blushed but didn't cover herself. "You too," she answered, beginning to unbutton his shirt. Her fingers trembled slightly, but didn't stop. Nathan remained motionless, letting her discover his body at her own pace. When she finished, they stood there for a moment just looking at each other, two people naked in more senses than the physical. "Now?" Eve asked. "Now," Nathan confirmed, picking her up. He carried her to the bedroom, laying her carefully on the bed. The firelight danced on her skin, creating golden patterns that made her look like an ancient goddess. Nathan lay down beside her, propping himself on his elbow. "I'm going to touch you now," he said, giving her one last chance to back away. "Yes," Eve answered, closing her eyes. "Please." Nathan started slowly, touching her face first, mapping each curve with his fingertips. Eve shivered but didn't pull away. He moved down her neck, her shoulders, stopping at the scars on her left arm. "Does this hurt?" he asked, tracing one of the pale lines. "No," Eve answered, opening her eyes. "Not when you touch it." Nathan continued exploring, discovering that her body responded to his touch in ways he hadn't anticipated. She wasn't passive as he had imagined she would be. She responded, moved, whispered his name in ways that made him forget the entire outside world. When he finally joined with her, Eve cried. Not from pain, although there was pain, but from something deeper, from relief, from completeness, from a liberation she had sought for years. Nathan held her as she cried, whispering words of comfort he didn't know he knew. "I'm okay," she said when the tears stopped. "I'm more than okay, I'm complete." Nathan looked at her, seeing in her eyes a transformation that mirrored the one happening inside him. She was no longer the broken girl who had appeared at his door. She was a whole woman, strong, who had chosen her own healing. "Me too," he admitted, surprising himself with the truth of the words. "I feel complete too." They made love until dawn, not with the fury Nathan was accustomed to, but with a sweet and devastating intensity that transformed him cell by cell. Each touch was a promise, each kiss a confession, each moment a small death and rebirth. When the sun finally rose, painting the room with golden light, Nathan and Eve were intertwined like two plants that had grown together. She slept deeply, her face relaxed and young, her lips slightly parted. Nathan remained awake, watching her, absorbing the impossible reality that he had found something he never knew he was looking for. "I love you," he whispered in the silence of the morning, the words escaping before he could stop them. Eve opened her eyes, smiling. "I love you too," she answered, as if she had been waiting for that confession for a long time. Nathan felt something break definitively inside him. The last wall, the last defense, the last remnant of the man he had been. In its place, something new was born, something vulnerable and frighteningly beautiful. "And now?" he asked. "Now," Eve said, kissing him softly. "Now we learn to live with hearts that have been mended by love." But even as she spoke, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that this happiness was too fragile to last, that the real world, with its complications and consequences, would soon come to charge them for the audacity of finding love amid so much destruction. The happiness lasted exactly 5 days. 5 days of an intimacy Nathan had never experienced, of conversations that extended into the early hours, of a connection that seemed to heal wounds he had carried for decades. Eve had transformed before his eyes, not just into a woman, but into a complete version of herself that he was beginning to suspect had always existed, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. On the morning of the 6th day, Nathan woke up alone. The bed still held the warmth of Eve's body, but she wasn't in the house. He looked for her in every room, a feeling of panic growing in his chest. Her belongings were still in the room, the clothes she had worn on arrival carefully folded on the dresser, but Eve had disappeared. It was then that he saw the envelope on the kitchen table, his name written in the delicate handwriting he had learned to recognize. With trembling hands, Nathan opened the paper and read the words that destroyed the world they had built together. "Nathan, I had to go out to take care of some things. Don't worry about me. I'll be back soon. With love, Eve." There were no explanations, no details about where she had gone or when she would return. Nathan reread the letter dozens of times, looking for clues between the lines, some sign that she hadn't simply fled from the reality of what they had shared. But the hours passed without news. Nathan called all his contacts, mobilized a small network of informants, but Eve had completely disappeared. It was as if she had never existed, as if the days they had spent together were just an elaborate dream his mind had created to torture him. On the 3rd day of her absence, Nathan received a call that changed everything. It was from Michael Santos, his lawyer and one of the few people he trusted. "Nathan, you need to come back to New York immediately," Michael said, his voice tense. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that can destroy you. And it has to do with a woman named Eve Marshall." Nathan felt his blood freeze in his veins. "What do you know about Eve?" "I know she's not who you think she is. I know you've been manipulated for weeks, and I know that if you don't come back now, you could lose much more than money." Nathan made the trip back to Manhattan in a state of controlled shock. All the certainties he had built about Eve, about what they had shared, began to crumble. Maybe she really was a sophisticated manipulator. Maybe it was all an elaborate setup to destroy him. Michael was waiting for him in the office, with a folder full of documents and photographs. "Sit down," he said, without preamble. "You're not going to like what I'm going to show you." The first photograph was of Eve, but not the Eve that Nathan knew. This Eve was in a courtroom, wearing a formal suit, talking to a man Nathan immediately recognized. James Morrison, a federal prosecutor who had spent years trying to find evidence to incriminate the Reed family. "She's a lawyer," Michael explained. "Harvard graduate, specialized in criminal law, and she's been working with the FBI for 2 years, building a case against you." Nathan picked up the photograph, studying the face of the woman he had learned to love. It was definitely Eve, but there was something different in her expression, something calculating that he had never seen before. "This can't be right," Nathan murmured. She approached you with a purpose," Michael continued, removing more documents from the folder. "The plan was to make you confess details about her father's death, record conversations, get evidence that could be used against you." Nathan felt the world crumbling around him. "Did she succeed?" "We don't know. But she disappeared exactly when you two became intimate. It's possible she got what she wanted." Nathan stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Down below, Manhattan bustled with its usual life, indifferent to the drama unfolding on the 40th floor. He had fallen in love with a woman who perhaps had never really existed. "There's more," Michael said hesitantly. "Eve Marshall isn't just a lawyer. She also has psychiatric problems. She was committed twice for psychotic episodes. There are records that she developed a pathological obsession with you after her father's death." Nathan closed his eyes, remembering Eve's nightmares, the screams during the night, the way she sometimes became absent as if she were in another world. "So nothing she said was true?" "We don't know," Michael admitted. "It's possible she really has feelings for you. People with psychiatric disorders can have difficulty distinguishing between reality and fantasy. It might have started as a mission and become something more." Nathan returned to the table, picking up another photograph. This showed Eve leaving a federal building carrying a folder. She looked tired, defeated, not victorious as someone who had just obtained evidence against a criminal should look. "Where is she now?" "We don't know. She disappeared 3 days ago. Not even the FBI can locate her." Nathan studied the photographs, looking for signs of the woman he had known. There was something in her eyes, even in the official photos, that suggested the Eve he had known wasn't completely a lie. There was real pain there, real vulnerability. "Michael," he said finally, "I want you to hire the best private investigators you can find. I want them to find Eve Marshall. I want to talk to her." "Nathan, this is dangerous." "If she really has evidence against you—" "I don't care," Nathan cut in. "I need to know the truth. I need to know if anything we lived was real." Michael sighed but nodded. "I'll do what I can, but promise me you'll be careful. A woman who can manipulate you to the point of making you fall in love is more dangerous than any enemy you've ever faced." Nathan didn't respond, but took the folder of documents. He would spend the entire night reading every line, studying every photograph, trying to reconcile the Eve he knew with the woman the documents described. Meanwhile, somewhere in New York, Eve was sitting in a cheap hotel room, a digital recorder on the table in front of her. She had listened to the recording dozens of times, Nathan's confession about her father's death, the evidence the FBI wanted so badly, but she couldn't bring herself to hand it over. Every time she picked up the phone to call James Morrison, she remembered the way Nathan had touched her, the gentleness in his eyes when she told him about her scars, the vulnerability in his voice when he talked about Sophia. Eve knew she was losing her sanity. The plan had been simple, Approach Nathan, make him confess, deliver the evidence, and finally have justice for her father's death. But the man she had found wasn't the monster she had imagined. He was a broken man, carrying guilt and pain, who had fallen in love with her in the same desperate way she had fallen in love with him. Now she was trapped between two versions of herself, the daughter who wanted justice, and the woman who had found love in the arms of the man who had destroyed her family. And for the first time since her father's death, Eve didn't know which one was the real one. The recorder remained on the table, small and innocent, holding secrets that could destroy the only man she had ever loved. Eve extended her hand toward it, hesitated, and then picked up the phone. It was time to make a choice that would change everything forever. Eve dialed the number with trembling fingers, but it wasn't to James Morrison. It was to Nathan. He answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting for the call. "Eve." His voice was laden with relief and desperation at the same time. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "In person. Where are you?" "Roosevelt Hotel, room 1247. Come alone, Nathan." "If you bring security, I'll disappear forever." Nathan hesitated for a moment. "Are you armed?" "No," Eve answered. "But maybe I should be." The call ended, leaving Nathan with more questions than answers. He grabbed his car keys, ignoring Michael's protests, and drove through the streets of Manhattan with an urgency that bordered on desperation. He needed to see her, needed to look into her eyes and discover how much of what they had shared was real. The Roosevelt Hotel was discreet, the kind of place where people hid when they didn't want to be found. Nathan climbed the stairs 2 steps at a time, his heart beating hard enough to hurt. When he knocked on the door of room 1247, it opened almost immediately. Eve was there, wearing the same clothes she had worn when she appeared at his door weeks ago. But there was something different about her face, a resolution that wasn't present before. She seemed to have made a decision that would change everything. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to give him space. Nathan entered the small room, immediately noticing the digital recorder on the table. There was a single chair, an unmade bed, and a window that overlooked the dirty alley behind the hotel. It was a depressing setting for what he knew would be a devastating confrontation. "You know," he said, not asking a question. "I know that you know," Eve answered, closing the door. "I know that your lawyers discovered who I am. I know that you know about the FBI, about my education, about my condition." Nathan turned to face her. "What is your condition, Eve? Because I need to know if the woman who fell in love with me was real, or if she was just another symptom of a disturbed mind." Eve flinched as if he had slapped her. "You think I'm crazy." "I think you're many things," Nathan answered. "I think you're brilliant. I think you're brave. I think you're devastatingly beautiful. And I think you may be unstable enough to build an elaborate fantasy about us." Eve walked to the window, looking at the alley below. "I am unstable," she admitted. "I started having psychotic episodes after my mother's death. Voices, hallucinations, periods when I couldn't distinguish between reality and fantasy. So I was committed twice." Nathan felt his heart tighten. "And when you sought me out?" "I was in a period of lucidity," Eve said, turning to face him. "Medicated, stable, able to make rational decisions. The decision to approach you was calculated, planned. It wasn't the product of a disturbed mind." "But falling in love with me was?" Eve smiled, but it was a sad smile. "No. Falling in love with you was the most real thing that ever happened to me. And that's why I couldn't deliver the evidence." Nathan looked at the recorder on the table. "You have my confession." "I do," Eve confirmed. "Everything you told me about my father's death, about Sophia, about the choices you made. It's all recorded there. And why didn't you turn it in?" Eve approached him, stopping a few steps away. "Because when you touched me, when you looked at me as if I were precious, when you held me during the nightmares, that can't be faked. Not by you. You don't know how to lie with your body, Nathan." Nathan felt tears burn his eyes. "So what happened between us was real?" "It was real," Eve confirmed. "Maybe it was the only real thing that ever happened to me. And that's why I ran. Because I realized I had become exactly what my father hated. Someone who puts personal interest above truth." Nathan took a step toward her. "Eve?" "No," she said, raising her hand. "Let me finish. I came here to give you a choice. I can hand this recording to the FBI, and you'll probably go to prison for the rest of your life. or I can destroy it and disappear forever. And what's the catch? There's no catch, Eve answered. Just one condition. If I destroy the recording, you need to promise me you'll visit Sophia, that you'll try to reconcile with your sister, that you'll stop punishing yourself for choices you made to protect her. Nathan was silent, processing the proposal. You're offering me freedom in exchange for redemption. I'm offering you the chance to become the man I saw when you slept beside me, the man who exists beneath all the layers of guilt and brutality. Nathan walked to the table, picking up the recorder. It was a small, insignificant object, but it held the power to destroy or liberate. And if I choose prison, then I'll visit you, Eve said simply, every week for the rest of my life. Because I love you, Nathan. I love you in a way that transcends justice or revenge or anything I thought I wanted. Nathan looked at her, seeing in her eyes the same vulnerability he had seen on the first night. You love me enough to give up justice for your father? I love you enough to understand that you've punished yourself more than any court could, Eve answered. And I love you enough to want you to be free, even if it means I'll never see you again. Nathan placed the recorder back on the table. And if I don't want to see you again? Eve smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile. Then you'd be lying to me for the first time since we met, because you need me as much as I need you. Nathan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of all the decisions he had made, all the lives he had destroyed, all the opportunities for redemption he had wasted. I don't deserve your love. Nobody deserves love, Eve said, approaching him. Love is a gift we give and receive, not something we earn. Nathan opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. Then give me that gift. Stay with me. Let's disappear together. Let's start a new life away from all this madness. Eve touched his face, running her thumb over a tear he hadn't even realized he had shed. Will you visit Sophia? I'll visit Sophia, Nathan promised. Then yes, Eve said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Let's disappear together. Nathan kissed her with the hunger of a man who had lost everything and found everything again. When they separated, he picked up the recorder and smashed it against the wall, the electronic components scattering across the floor like confetti from a somber celebration. It's over, he said. No, Eve corrected, embracing him. Now it's beginning. But even as they lost themselves in each other's arms, both knew that running away wouldn't be as simple as destroying evidence. The FBI was still hunting Nathan. He still had enemies who wouldn't sleep while he was free. And Eve still had to deal with her own mental instability. But for now, in that depressing hotel room, they had each other. And sometimes when the whole world is against you, having each other is enough to start. The escape was more difficult than Nathan had imagined. It wasn't enough to simply disappear. They needed to erase decades of existence, cut ties that had been forged in blood and money. But Eve proved surprisingly skilled in planning, her legal training and knowledge of the system working in their favor. False identities are easier to obtain than you imagine, she said, as they worked on the laptop in the hotel room. Especially when you have the resources we have. Nathan had discreetly liquidated several offshore accounts, transferring funds to tax havens where they could live comfortably for the rest of their lives. It wasn't the fortune he possessed before, but it was enough to start over. Where are we going? He asked, watching her work. Argentina, Eve answered without hesitation. Buenos Aires. Big enough for us to get lost. Sophisticated enough for us to live well, and far enough that no one will look for us. Nathan smiled. She had thought of everything, planned every detail with a precision that impressed him. Did you already have all this calculated before you sought me out? Plan B, Eve admitted, in case I decided I didn't want to return to the life I had before. And did you decide? Eve stopped typing, looking at him. I decided. I don't want to be Victor Marshall's daughter anymore. I don't want to be a lawyer who works for the FBI anymore. I want to be just Eve, the woman who loves Nathan Reed. Nathan felt something move in his chest, an emotion that was still too new to be named. And I want to be just Nathan, the man who loves Eve. But before they could leave, Nathan had a promise to fulfill. The next morning, he headed to the psychiatric hospital where Sophia was committed. Eve offered to accompany him, but he preferred to go alone. This is something I need to do without you, he explained. I need to face my past before I can build a future. The hospital was a clean and quiet place, with corridors that smelled of disinfectant and lost hope. Nathan hadn't visited Sophia in 2 years, since the last time she had screamed upon seeing him, accusing him of being the demon who had destroyed her family. "She's having a good day," the nurse said, guiding him down the corridor. "Lucid, calm. It might be a good opportunity for you to talk." Nathan found Sophia in the inner garden, sitting on a bench under a tree, drawing in a sketch pad. She had aged in the last 2 years, grey strands appearing in her brown hair, but she was still beautiful, still had the green eyes he remembered from childhood. "Sophia," he said softly, approaching. She looked up, and Nathan prepared himself for the screams, for the accusations, for the pain that always came when she recognized him. But Sophia just smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "Nathan," she said. "You came." "I came," he confirmed, sitting beside her. "How are you?" "Better," Sophia answered. "The new medications are working. The voices are still there, but they're not as loud anymore. They're not as cruel." Nathan looked at the drawing she was making. It was a portrait of him, but not as he was now. It was how he had been when they were children, before everything became complicated. "Do you remember when we were little?" Sophia asked. "When you protected me from nightmares, when you told me the monsters weren't real?" "I remember," Nathan said, his voice breaking. "I used to think you had become one of the monsters," Sophia continued, "that you had chosen to be cruel because it was easier than being kind." Nathan felt tears burn his eyes. "Maybe I did become one." "No," Sophia said, touching his hand. "You just got lost. But monsters don't get lost. Monsters always know where they are." Nathan looked at his sister, seeing in her the child he had protected, the girl who believed in him when no one else did. "Sophia, I need to tell you something. I need to leave. I'm going away and may not come back." Sophia nodded as if she expected that revelation. "You found someone. How do you know?" "Because you're different. There's light in your eyes again. There's hope." Nathan smiled, surprised by her perception. "I found her. I found a woman who makes me want to be the man you used to see in me." "Then go," Sophia said, squeezing his hand. "Go and be happy. Go and be the man I always knew you could be." Nathan kissed her forehead, feeling that he was finally saying goodbye, not just to Sophia, but to everything he had been before. "I love you, Sophia. Everything I did trying to protect you." "I know," she answered, "and I forgive you. Now you need to forgive yourself too." Nathan left the hospital with a lighter heart than he had felt in years. Sophia had given him what he needed most, forgiveness. Not just from her, but permission to forgive himself. When he returned to the hotel, he found Eve packing her few possessions. "How was it?" she asked. "Liberating," Nathan answered, embracing her. "I'm ready to leave." "Then let's go," Eve said. "Our flight leaves in 3 hours." They left New York on a rainy March afternoon, two fugitives united by love and impossible circumstances. The plane took off carrying not just 2 passengers, but also the hope that love could really conquer everything, even justice, even the past, even madness. During the flight, Eve slept on Nathan's shoulder, and he spent hours watching her relaxed face, absorbing the reality that she had chosen him above all else. She had chosen love above justice, redemption above revenge. "You're watching me," she murmured without opening her eyes. "I am," Nathan admitted. "I still can't believe you're real." "I am real," Eve said, finally opening her eyes. "And I'm yours, forever." Nathan kissed the top of her head, feeling for the first time in decades that the future was a beautiful possibility instead of a constant threat. "Forever," he repeated. But as the plane cut through the sky toward a new life, neither of them knew that James Morrison had discovered Eve's disappearance and was mobilizing international resources to find them. Neither of them knew that Michael Santos had been arrested for complicity and was negotiating information about Nathan's whereabouts. And neither of them knew that the true trial of their love was just beginning. 6 months later, Nathan and Eve had built a simple life in Buenos Aires. They lived in a modest apartment in the Palermo neighborhood, far from the luxury Nathan had known, but full of a peace neither of them had experienced before. Eve worked in a small bookstore, while Nathan had discovered an unexpected talent for restoring antique furniture. "Who would have thought the feared Nathan Reed had an artisan's hands?" Eve joked one morning, watching him work on a wooden table. "Who would have thought the brilliant lawyer Eve Marshall would find happiness selling books?" Nathan answered, pulling her in for a kiss. They had married in a simple ceremony, just the two of them, and a justice of the peace who didn't ask questions about pasts. Eve wore a simple white dress, Nathan a discreet suit, and both carried rings they had chosen together at a small local jewelry store. "We are normal people now," Eve said that night, lying in his arms. "We're people who love each other," Nathan corrected. "That's much more than normal." But the normalcy they had built was fragile, sustained by fake documents and the hope that the past would never catch up with them. And on a rainy September morning, the past arrived in the form of James Morrison, who appeared at the bookstore where Eve worked. "Hello, Eve," he said, entering the store as if he were a regular customer. "Or should I say, Mrs. Castellanos?" Eve felt her blood freeze but maintained her composure. "I don't know who you're talking about." James smiled, approaching the counter. "I can understand why you gave up, Eve. I really can. Nathan Reed is a persuasive man. But you can't just disappear. There are consequences for your actions." "What consequences?" "Obstruction of justice, complicity, fleeing federal jurisdiction." "Shall I continue?" Eve looked around the bookstore, the small world she had built with Nathan. "What do you want?" "I want you to come back and testify against him. I want you to tell the truth about what he confessed. I want justice for your father." "And if I refuse?" James leaned on the counter, his voice low and threatening. "Then I'll arrest you right here, in front of all your neighbors. I'll drag you back to the United States in handcuffs, and I'll make sure Nathan Reed is hunted to the ends of the earth." Eve closed her eyes, feeling the weight of all the choices she had made. "Will you give me until tomorrow to decide?" "You have until tonight," James answered. "Meet me at the Alvea Hotel at 8 o'clock. Alone." When Nathan arrived home that afternoon, he found Eve sitting on the porch, looking at the horizon with an expression he had learned to recognize. It was the same expression she had when making difficult decisions. "They found us," she said without preamble. Nathan felt the familiar world crumbling once again. "Who?" "James Morrison. He wants me to go back to testify against you. He wants me to tell about your confession." Nathan sat beside her, taking her hand. "And what are you going to do?" "I don't know," Eve admitted. "He threatened to hunt us to the ends of the earth if I don't cooperate. But if I go back, you'll go to prison. And I can't live knowing I was the one who destroyed you." Nathan kissed her hand, absorbing the magnitude of what they were facing. "Maybe it's time to stop running." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's time for me to face the consequences of my actions. You shouldn't have to carry the weight of my choices." Eve turned to face him, her eyes shining with tears. "Would you leave me?" "Never," Nathan answered firmly. "But maybe there's another way." That night, Nathan accompanied Eve to the Alvea Hotel. They waited outside until James Morrison left the building. Then Nathan approached. "Morrison," he called. James turned, his hand instinctively going to his gun. "Nathan Reed, I didn't expect to see you here." "I came to make a deal," Nathan said, keeping his hands visible. "You want justice for Victor Marshall's death, I confess, publicly. I take full responsibility for what happened." "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for you leaving Eve alone. She had nothing to do with this. She didn't know anything when she got involved with me." James studied Nathan, looking for signs of deception. "You would publicly confess to the murder of Victor Marshall?" "I would," Nathan confirmed. "And I would provide details about other crimes in my family. Names, dates, evidence, everything you've always wanted. And Eve. Eve goes free. Complete immunity. She can go back to her life as a lawyer, or she can continue being a bookseller in Buenos Aires. Her choice." James considered the proposal. "You would do this for her?" "I would do anything for her," Nathan answered. "Including paying for what I did?" Eve, who had been watching the conversation from a distance, approached. "Nathan, no. It's the only way," he said, touching her face. "It's the only way for you to be truly free. I don't want to be free if it means losing you." Nathan kissed her, a long and desperate kiss that he knew might be the last. "You won't lose me. You'll visit me in prison. You'll write me letters. You'll love me even through the bars." "That's not a life," Eve protested. "It's the life we can have," Nathan answered, "and it's better than having no life at all." 2 days later, Nathan Reed surrendered to American authorities. His confession made headlines in all the newspapers, one of the most sensational cases of the decade. He provided details about decades of Reed family crimes, exposing a network of corruption that reached the highest levels of government. Eve returned to New York, but not as a lawyer. She opened a small bookstore in Greenwich Village, a cozy place where she served coffee and organized book clubs. Every day after closing the store, she wrote a letter to Nathan, telling him about her day, about the books she had read, about the people she had met. Nathan was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but with the possibility of parole in 12. Eve visited him every week, never missing once. They talked about books, about dreams, about the future they would build when he was released. "Do you regret it?" Eve asked during one of the visits. "Confessing, never," Nathan answered. "Meeting you, never. Even knowing it would lead to this, because now I know that love is real. I know it's worth fighting for, even if the fight temporarily separates us." "Temporarily," Eve repeated like a promise. "Temporarily," Nathan confirmed. And so in the most impossible circumstances, Nathan Reed and Eve Marshall found a form of love that transcended prisons, trials, and the weight of the past. It wasn't the life they had planned, but it was the life they chose. And sometimes, when love is real, that's enough. The name on the bookstore badge said Eve Reed because she had chosen to carry the name of the man she loved, even though he was behind bars. And every night before sleeping, she held the ring he had given her in Buenos Aires and whispered the same promise. "I'm waiting for you. I've always waited for you." Because sometimes the deepest love is the one that teaches us that patience is just another name for hope.